Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another episode of the Blazing Faith podcast. We started a series, the previous video, over anxiety. So here's what I'm going to say is that if you were not able to watch the previous video, which is called Worried About Everything, then I would highly encourage you to go back and to watch that video. I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that my videos are short and concise because I know that everybody is busy and I want to pack as much information as I can, but I also want it to be, I don't want to just be talking. I don't want to just ramble. So I try to make them short. Now this video, this past one that I put out called Worried About Everything, is actually about 19 minutes long. It's a pretty long video. In fact, I think it's the longest video that I've put out. But it's about anxiety. It's about us worrying about everything. And I think it's going to set a good groundwork for what we're going to do on the rest of the videos that we're putting out. So go back and watch that video if you can. If not, today we're continuing on talking about anxiety. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about different forms of anxiety over the next couple of videos. And today we're talking about anxiety from insecurity. Now, I had lunch with a really good friend of mine. His name is Brad. He's probably going to watch this. He watches all of them. He comments on most of them, which I hope that you will do. I hope that you'll comment, like, subscribe, share, do all those things. But he always is so good about telling me, hey man, that was a great video. He's just really encouraging guy. And I had lunch with him today, and we tell each other all these things. We're always really open and transparent and honest with each other. And he said, man, I loved the video that you put out today, the one that we started with anxiety, called Worried About Everything. He said, I love the video. He goes, but it didn't work. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, man, he was like, I'm anxious about some things in my life. And here's the deal. There is so much with anxiety. It's not just you apply these three things and anxiety's better, anxiety's gone, because anxiety comes in so many different forms. And insecurity is one of those forms that anxiety comes in. And I think that insecurity is one of those things that most people struggle with. So I want to ask you a question. Do you know somebody who doesn't have a single insecurity in their life? I do. I know somebody. It's my 5-year-old son. That dude has zero insecurities in his life. I mean, like, literally, there's nothing in his life that he is insecure about. Like, he walks around with food on his face, shirts off. Like, hopefully he has pants on. The dude is not insecure about anything. He thinks that he can beat anybody up, and he is the definition of carefree of what anybody else thinks about him. You know, I'm sure I was the same way at 5 years old. I probably had very little insecurities in my life. I probably wasn't anxious about a lot of these things that I am now because I didn't struggle with insecurities when I was young, but sometime along the way, I obviously began to develop insecurities in my life. I started to learn things. I started to understand things like, you know what, maybe I'm not as smart as that friend of mine that I have. Why am I not as smart as them? And it made me insecure. Or maybe I'm not as good at this sport as that person is. Why is that? Or I'm not as tall as that person. I'm a lot shorter than them. You know, like all these things began to develop insecurities in my life. And insecurity is one of those things that most people struggle with. It is a form of anxiety. If you ever look in the mirror and you go, man, my clothes are just fitting a little bit snug, it can cause you to become very insecure. When you're driving through town and you see a lot of really nice cars and you go, man, my car's not as nice as all these other people, it can cause you to become very insecure when people come over to your house and it's not as put together as you think that their house probably is. And you go, man, my house doesn't look like their house does. It can cause you to become very insecure. Maybe you have a great solution at work. You have this idea and you go, man, this is a great idea. But you're afraid to speak up. Why? Because you're insecure. You don't know what other people are going to say about you. You want to talk to somebody. You think, man, that person, I think that we would be really good friends, but you don't go talk to them. Why? Because you have insecurities. You're afraid of what they might say or what they might not say. You're afraid that they might treat you wrong. And so you would rather just not develop a relationship with that person. This is called insecurity, and it is a form of anxiety. Every bit of me says, I don't think that God's will for your life is for you to be stressed out to the max. I don't believe that God's will for you is to have anxiety. In fact, I believe it's the opposite. I believe that God's will for you is to actually have peace within your life. And guess what people who are anxious don't have? Peace. People who are anxious don't have peace in their life. So people who have peace don't have anxiety in your life. If you're tired of living your life with a ton of anxiety, it's because you don't have peace. And if you know who has peace, God, Jesus has peace. Think about Gideon. Go back to the Old Testament. In the book of Judges, Gideon was a judge in the Old Testament. And if you're going, hey, you said to think back about Gideon, I don't even know who Gideon is. Let me give you a little bit of help. Gideon was a judge for the nation of Israel. And what a judge wasn't like a judge that we think of now. It's not like Judge Judy. A judge was essentially, it was like a leader who, was supposed to communicate with God, and they were supposed to lead the nation of Israel, and they would even go to battle with their nation. There were some pretty big, pretty important judges, men and women. There was Deborah. There was Samson was a judge. There's these judges, and they're strong, and they're powerful, and they're really good leaders. And then there's a guy by the name of Gideon. And in Judges chapter 6, we're introduced to this man by the name of Gideon, who is this mighty man of valor. That's how he's introduced, a mighty man of valor. The only problem is this: Gideon wasn't a mighty man of valor. Gideon was a mighty man of insecurity. He was super insecure. In fact, where we're introduced to Gideon in Judges chapter 6, he's hiding from enemies in a wine press. Okay? This is where he is. He's hiding. That is not a mighty man of valor. That is a man who's very scared. That is a man who is very fearful. That is a man who, when you really look at this, is insecure. And I say insecure because the things that he says when he's confronted by the angel. He says things like, I can't lead an army. Like, I've got the worst family in all of Israel, and I'm the weakest one out of my family. So I've got the worst family, and I'm the worst of the worst family. Like, I'm not the guy for the job. That sounds like insecurity to me, right? But God saw Gideon for who he was. And thank goodness that that's how God sees us, for who he created us to be. God doesn't see us the way that our friends see us. Like, God doesn't see us any other way than how God created for us to be. God sees us for who we are. That's how he sees us. In Psalm chapter 139, King David says this. He says, "You created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb." Listen to this. "I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made." Now, what does that word fearfully mean? It doesn't mean that God created you to be fearful, but it's that God created you fearfully. And what it means is it's God created you in a way that when other people see you, it causes them to stop and go, whoa, look at that person. Like, only God could have made that person. In fact, that's why it says he made you fearfully and wonderfully. Like, wonderfully made, it makes sense, but fearfully, it's going that people are going to stop and look at you and go, that has to be a creation of God. It sounds like a pickup line, right? But that's how God sees you. God created you fearfully, where people see you and just say, man, God had to have made that person. And now is when most people are going to go, yeah, that's nice. That might be for everybody else, but not me. And the reason why you see yourself this way, much like Gideon did, is because you see yourself how you see yourself, not how God sees you. And if you're not careful, your insecurities, your anxiety, your insecurity will kill your self-confidence. And when you lose your self-confidence, you no longer can see yourself the way that God created you to be. Now, I'm not gonna lie. I am 5'5". Because of my beard, I think it makes me look about 10 pounds overweight, I think, something like that. I'm not the smartest person. It's easy for me to begin to feel insecure unless I remember that God made me. And God made you too. And you are what the world needs. Yes, you, the introverted you, the extroverted you, the nerd, the jock, the Cowboys fan. The world needs some Cowboys fans, even though we're never gonna win. Like, we need some Cowboys fans. Like, God made you that way. The world needs you. Why? Because God formed you fearfully and wonderfully. He made you. The world needs you. Because you have a story to tell that can lead other people to Jesus. You have a story to tell that can show the love of Jesus Christ, that would cause him to go to the cross and die on the cross a death that you and I both deserved. The world needs you because you have a story that you can share the hope of Jesus that so many people need. You're so insecure about yourself, but God made you fearfully and wonderfully, and the world needs you because you have a story to tell. Don't let the world make you anxious by your insecurities. God has created you with a huge purpose.